Welcome back. This is going to be a much calmer panel than the opening one, because this is serious lawyers, appraisers, and money, and we're going to be looking at the assets behind loans and aircraft finance. Vivek, you get this top spot for Globejet Capital. Eddie, would you like to introduce yourself very quickly?
Everybody knows who I am.
Ooh.
Eddie Gross, Vedder Price, DC office, do all sorts of things, especially aircraft finance, corporate aircraft finance, for many years.
Rick Berkemeier, Pegasus Aircraft Appraisal Group, Rhode Island.
Don Walsh, Stonebriar Commercial Finance.
Paul Jebley, no one knows who I am. I'm a lawyer as well.
And they're happier for it.
Here we go.
Vivek, Kaushal, Global Jet Capital.
So the aim of this panel is we've got two asset lenders. Would you agree with that description?
Absolutely. We are an asset lender. And we are a pure play asset lender. This is all we do, business aviation financing.
Don, are you happy to be called an asset lender?
Yeah, I think that's a good description of it. What's different about a bank versus a non-bank? Banks make leases and loans, and they take deposits. Non-banks only make loans, which is loans or leases, and that's what we are. So by not taking deposits, we're regulated differently, non-regulated. So in theory, allows us to take more risk or a different view on risk, and we both. That's mainly what we do in our own different ways.
Okay, Eddie, we're talking about asset finance. How competitive would you see the US aircraft finance, the asset finance market?
All right, so if we're really talking about asset finance, where the focus is not the credit, but the asset, there are very few players. And you're looking at the two I know best, and who have been in this space long enough that they really understand corporate aircraft. And so competition, I think it's between these two companies.
In the US as well?
In the US for that business.
Okay, Paul, you're based in Hong Kong?
I'm based in Hong Kong, but I also practice internationally. So I agree with Eddie's comments on the US, and that's the last time I will agree with him. But internationally...
Last time you'll be right.
Internationally, it's very much a similar situation. I primarily act for ultra-high net worth individuals, and it is increasingly difficult for them to source financing for anything other than the newest assets, and for anyone other than the highest credits as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Okay, Don, what do you see as the biggest risks when you're making an international deal, when you're agreeing to one? What are the big risks that worry you most or cause you the most hassle?
I think the biggest risk, and it's a risk that all financiers would have, but for an asset-based lender who might not have other levers to pull or many other levers to pull, the biggest risk is the condition of the airplane. In a distressed situation, you don't want to find out that the asset hasn't been cared for, has, inspections due or programs past due, because then what you've bargained for isn't what you have. So I would say that's the biggest risk.
Rich, as an appraiser, would you agree with all of those and all those issues, and what can financiers do to stop them? Or reduce the risk, not stop them?
Well, I think most of the group here, so I'm an appraiser, and Stonebriar, Global Jet, they have on staff an appraiser who's as good as any of the appraisers here in the room that manage their portfolio inside and out. PNC, all the major players do a pretty good job of that. So they have an appraiser, they're out inspecting their assets, they may have the portfolio appraised. So I think they do a pretty good job of that.
Vivek, how often do you see each other?
For us, one of our big differentiators is a dedicated asset management group. And to the point that Richard was just making, We've got staff valuation personnel that are as good as anyone in the industry. That said, we also rely pretty heavily on outside appraisers, outside inspection firms, and we go touch the metal regularly to make sure that it's in good shape. The other thing that we pay a lot of attention to when we're doing transactions in non-US jurisdictions is really the operator that we're partnering with. So having a tripartite agreement in place with a really good third-party operator is, I think, key to structuring a good cross-border international deal. And time after time, we find that holds us in good stead. We've had situations where planes have not been, there have been issues with the aircraft, but when you're dealing with a quality operator, you know that that's going to be taken care of, even if it's a fairly complex fix. These guys persist. These guys make sure that it ends up in the right shop to get done, and it is only done when it's done. So aligning yourself with the right operator is a key part of doing these cross-border deals.
How much of a tripartite agreement is relationship and future deals, and how much is actually the hard legal?
I'd say that 100% of it is relationship. You got to know who you're doing business with, and if the day comes for you to rely on the letter of the agreement, you probably didn't do your job.
Eddie, do you agree?
It depends. So in the U.S., it's tripartite. In other words, if it's just a domestic deal, there's not the same emphasis. It's most of the operators are known pretty well, the managers and even charter operators. And so there's that already existing comfort level because there'll be certain baselines set in terms of who could be an appropriate manager or a charter operator. So in some respects, it's just a collaborative document where the tripartite party agrees to give up the aircraft if there is a default. And the subordination of the rights, right, that associated with that's the most important thing.
Paul?
I agree with Eddie again on the U.S. market. Internationally, particularly in markets in Asia, where the entire concept of tripartite agreements are fairly new. I mean, certainly within the past 8 years, it is, I would say, sort of more legal than not. I'd put it at, to be scientific, at 79.3% legal. And I've certainly had to be in the position where I've attempted to enforce tripartites, and I've been in the position where I've defended the enforcement of tripartites. They are worth having, put it that way.
When you've defended them, has the operator lost the relationship with that financial institution forever? Because that's the big threat, isn't it? If you don't work with Vivek, he'll never ever recommend you as an operator or let one of his clients go there.
When I've defended them, the operator could care less because the operator's greater relationship is with the owners, and it tends to follow the money. But to answer your question directly, that relationship is for the time being on ice. But memories tend to be short on these things. They'll be back. They all come back.
Don, when you're choosing an operator, because do you care about size? As long as it's not owned by the individual who's taking the aircraft or a friend of his or his brother, do you care about the size of an operator? Or is it just easier going with a big operator?
For cross-border transactions, I think, we do prefer the larger operators with global presence, multiple facilities, big fleets, a lot of different airplane type capabilities. But that doesn't mean that's the only operators that we'll approve to work with. I think, there needs to be some scale. We don't want our borrower to be the only client of that manager, right? Besides all the tangible things, I think there's intangible stuff we care about, mostly, an appreciation for the dual alliance between the lender and the owner, and the importance of communication, keeping us in front of information. In distressed situations, what we have found is the operator can be the key party to drive a solution that works for everybody, because quite often embarrassment is what the owner is trying to avoid. And, the lender doesn't want a legal action and proceedings, and the operator may be owed some money, and they're the one that knows the owner the best, and they're the one communicating with all the parties. So more often than that's, a key piece of what we're underwriting is that relationship to the manager.
So another significant consideration regarding an operator and an asset financer suggesting that a particular operator would be a good choice or not be a good choice has to do with liability. With ownership comes liability. And so if you're financing as a secured party, a lender, less of a concern, but still some, but you own the aircraft, and there are strict liability laws in most of the states in the U.S., and there's some federal safe harbor that's protective, but you will want to be sure that the reputation of that operator, if you're approving that operator, that should be one of the considerations. And in terms of suggesting an operator, maybe there should be some reluctance about that, because in the event that there's a problem, there might be a look back to the financing provider who's already become, then part of the liability chain.
Right. I think when we look at operators and, we sit across the table with a lot of you guys that are in the operating business, what we're looking at is scale, because we think, scale gives you the ability to manage some of these complex aircraft. It gives you some redundancy in the kinds of facilities and capabilities that you need. Safety is really important to us in terms of how the aircraft is managed. And finally, compliance, where, making sure that, for example, if you're in the greater China region, there's some serious cabotage restrictions that you have to comply with. And often there's some, tensions between what the owner wants. They want the plane to be in China as much as possible. Whereas as an operator, that the plane needs to leave China every, few flight segments every few weeks. So keeping your eye on the ball and not letting the plane getting caught up in things like that is critically important to us. And that's where scale comes in. That's where, when you're interacting with an operator that's got the right safety staff, the right maintenance staff, the right lawyers, frankly, that know how to direct the activities of the business in a, safe and, non-confrontational manner, it becomes really important.
So we've got a question from Greg Coburn. Do lenders carry out operator assessments in a similar vein as aircraft surveys?
We do. 100% of the time, if we're doing business with a new operator, we go out and meet with the operator. We've got either our own people, our technical staff, or people that we've impaneled going and speaking with them, kicking the tires, understanding their safety routines, understanding their maintenance capabilities, and making a determination if they're right for us.
Yeah, same for us. We have an audit review process for new operators, same as appraising an airplane. And then our document gives us an annual right to reappraise, re-inspect the airplane, and it can be the same for the operator at that time too.
Okay, another great question from the audience. What data would you value about the assets you're lending against? ADS-B enables access to a lot of information about the use of the aircraft. Honestly, Vivek, would you rather know that your aircraft's flying from Colombia to Colorado 10 times a week, or would you rather find out later?
So, look, I think it's a nuanced question. It's a great question, but it's a nuanced question. And I'll start off, first of all, by saying, the fundamental proposition of our transactions is it's a triple net transaction. So you have peaceful enjoyment of the aircraft, you're responsible for its usage, and we will absolutely make sure as a counterparty that, we've underwritten you, that we've explored those kinds of possibilities at the get-go. If after we've underwritten that, you're doing those trips to Colombia and back, hopefully there's a very good business reason underlying it other than, being in the controlled substances trade. But really, the data that we value about the assets is really around the upkeep of the assets. There are a handful of things that differentiate a good aircraft from a bad aircraft. We all know what those are. It starts with the configuration of the aircraft, the condition of the aircraft, whether the engines and the APU are enrolled on a program, and then frankly, how it's being managed. And we do have annual inspections of the aircraft to make sure that it's being properly maintained. We do, on occasion, look at where the planes are going, primarily from a point of view of understanding what our tax exposure might be to different countries, but it's very limited. There is the ability to get that data out of FlightAware, and it can be done quite easily. Frankly, we've done it on a couple occasions, and it's possible. But all other things being equal, we'd rather do business with people where we don't have to worry about that.
Eddie?
Yeah, so there are regulatory responsibilities, the federal aviation regulations and the somewhat recent policy clarification about an owner's responsibility to know where the aircraft is, who's operating it, and other circumstances that would have to be reported if the FAA demanded that information. Also, there was a recent OFAC sanction case where an engine got subleased to a bad country, and there was a major fine associated with it. So it is important to know, and I can imagine there are probably more regulations that would require you to know that.
And also, I would add, from a reputational standpoint, it's good to be aware as well. If you happen to be the owner of an aircraft that was formerly used by one Jeffrey Epstein and its corporate jet molester, you really want to sort of be aware of that because of the blowback that might occur against you as the owner, particularly in a lease situation.
Rich, do you, as an appraiser, appraisers don't get access to ADSB. You see an aircraft one-off, you look back at the records. Would you like to have more data?
I don't think that, I want to know that it's on ADSB, but I don't believe I need that data.
So it's not if it's based in, say, somewhere with corrosion, where there's pollution or volcanic area.
I'm not doing a pre-buy. As an appraiser, I'm not doing a pre-buy. I'm not guaranteeing a pre-buy. I'm not bore scoping anything. I'm not tearing things up. In fact, when I'm looking at an airplane, I want somebody with me. I don't want the claim that he walked off with the engine or the airworthiness certificate or that sort of thing. So I keep my distance, and I think most appraisers do. So.
Okay, a question from a maintenance program provider. What do you think the support programs for the assets add in terms of real-world value? Don, do you insist on maintenance programs?
We do. I think, per the panel with Steve and Ollie, it's expected anymore, right? And without, you have a hard time being able to sell an airplane, I think.
I'll add a little bit more color to that. It is absolutely de rigueur in the industry to insist that engines in particular be enrolled in a maintenance service program. But here's something for the providers to think about. The vast majority of engines that you're putting out there today are on-condition engines. What that means is that you're paying, your user is paying hourly usage charges, and there may never be a maintenance event on the aircraft for years and years and years. So where the plane would go down, after 4,000 hours for a midlife and 8,000 hours for a full overhaul, the question really is what is the perception of value? And it isn't happening yet, but we're starting to hear rumblings from the largest of large corporates where they're going, hey, the last plane we had, we put 10,000 hours on, and we never had to do an overhaul on the engine. And what's the value of paying 900 hours aside on an engine program when I'm never going to overhaul the engine? So it's something for you guys to think about, because it is going to become a theme given the vast majority of engines being on condition versus hard time.
Although, when you insure your house and it doesn't burn down, you're not like, I wish I hadn't insured it.
Yeah, it's really a question of the price, whether you're charging a fair price for that insurance, or whether it needs to be something different.
And I would say that every single bank, non-bank financing provider that we represent requires it in their loan and lease documents. And they require it at the outset transaction. They require that it be maintained all throughout the transaction. And then if it's a lease, upon return, right, it's an essential return provision.
Absolutely.
Rich, would you give your thoughts on that? What's the real world value of a maintenance program?
In terms of aircraft, if it's, as most have said up here, it's not very sellable. It makes the appraiser's job quite easy. Now, when you get into maybe, if it's a JSSI contract, you got to read the contract. If it's Pratt, Rolls-Royce, whatever, you have to understand the terms of the contract, but adds significant value makes the appraiser's job quite easy.
I can add to that. Whenever, in terms of real world value, we advise owners where they're seeking financing that it is an absolute requirement because it enables them to access financing, for one. But in terms of the contractual conditions, one thing I'll say is that having dealt with this numerous times on behalf of owners, not all support programs are created equal, and not all contracts are the same, even if they're presented as standard. And it can occasionally be exceedingly difficult to claim under those policies, much in the same way as you might claim when your house is burnt down.
Comment from an engine OEM. Reserves must be accrued towards that next shop visit. So even if you don't see a SV, someone will, and it needs to be funded.
Can't disagree with that. It's really a question of what's the frequency and whether it's being priced properly. It really comes down to the way you price any insurance event. What is the rate at which the event occurs? What is the associated, financial impact of the event, and how are you spreading it out amidst all your insurance policies?
A question from JSSI. Would the type of maintenance programs like JSSI 100% get me better terms on the loan? Has anyone been sponsored to say yes?
They are a client, so...
The answer is that a yes?
Yes.
Do you worry, we always talk about engines, which are obviously really important. We don't talk as much about avionics and keeping up to date with the latest, obviously ADS-B, or in-flight connectivity. How seriously do you look at that when you're financing an aircraft? Are you buying in, when you're doing the calculations for owner, are you putting in upgrades and?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if you're, if you're operating a Falcon, for example, getting to the next avionics suite for certain of the models that predate that, is important. It's a real value add. That being said, you can still operate the aircraft without the upgrade. And so from our perspective, it's really a question of if it's mandatory, then obviously you've got to have it. If it's not, it's going to be reflected in the value. It's going to reflect, what we, advance against that, or what your lease rent is.
Al, I thought it was pretty interesting. I think I asked a question maybe in Miami, a PNC Global Jet. How many planes are not going to be on ADS-B coming against the timeline? They had all went out. It was all done. They had managed the process.
Yeah, we have 0 aircraft in the portfolio that aren't ADS-B compliant. One thing that people don't know about us is that we probably, if not the largest, we're in the top 2 operating lessors of business aircraft. So we've got 100+ aircraft under operating lease, where we are the title owner. So we're acutely focused on things like ADS-B, making sure that those aircraft are all mandate compliant. And all but 2 of even the non-operating lease aircraft are ADS-B compliant. So I mean, that's the extent to which we're tracking it and making sure that the mandates are being met.
I think regards to the technology question, if you're forecasting an airplane value, and it'll be 10 years old or so at the end point, you probably do need to expect to invest money to update the the cabin management system or the avionics, just to make it a sellable airplane. And that wouldn't have been the case, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Technology wasn't as big of a portion of the cost going in. And I'm just wondering, right, do you have to think about that when you're forecasting?
Yeah, absolutely. We passed around what are the lives of these aircraft. Maybe used to be 30. I think it's more like 18 now. And it's all based on engine technology, avionics, that sort of thing. Those things are compressing that timeline and compressing those forecasts.
Has anyone looked at doing a tripartite agreement with a satellite provider? Because they could just shut down the aircraft.
Shut down or shoot down?
Shut it. They can shut down. They can not shoot down. Shut down. They can just turn off the Wi-Fi and the. Have you looked at doing a tripartite with those guys?
We haven't, honestly. I mean, I don't want us to be holding that kind of. Let me put it this way: if that's the kind of threat we want to hold over you, we probably don't want to do business with you. I mean, really, that's the way we think.
But surely,
about it.
like cutting off Netflix will get them to pay.
Interesting. Don't give the lawyers any ideas. Every deal from now on.
Yeah, I will say just on that avionics point that we've sold 40 odd aircraft in the last 3 years. I can't remember a single instance when we've actually had to upgrade the avionics to consummate the sale.
And if you're a financing provider, I'm going to go to your question, interesting as it is. If I'm the in-house counsel for that company that's thinking about that, or their outside counsel, and they came to me, I go like, NFW with the initials that come to mind, because that is one of the most difficult things to enforce, right? Something like that, because the implications of it, the unknown implications of it, right, could be so disastrous that it has no real value, other than people will be very angry.
Do we have any questions? Okay. Why are there not more asset financiers? Are you guys in a terrible business?
I personally don't think so. I think, I come to work every day just, looking at an unbelievable array of opportunities. We're grateful to actually be a asset financier in this business. I think the constraining factor, as with a lot of other people, is actually the lack of expertise. It takes a lot of time and effort. It took us a lot of effort to build out this platform and create the capabilities to do this well in a way that, our shareholders, our debt investors trust us with, a fairly large balance sheet that it takes to get to scale and bring this service to our customers.
Well, wouldn't that really be the crux of it? How do you get your money, right? How do you get your money to fund your business? That's so extraordinary that in of itself, right, would be a
absolutely
big issue.
Right, exactly. And I think when I look back on our journey, what's very hard to do in this business is to get funded at scale, and it's really educating investors and getting the right support. And I've personally met with more than 100 bond investors, more than 100, and that's really what it takes to create what we've done, in terms of a securitization program. But today, what we've got is that platform. Now, the business is open to folks with that patience. It just takes that level of time and effort.
What's your strike rate on getting an investor to invest?
At this point, our securitization program has 40+ distinct investors. So of the 100+ investors I've met, 40+ are in the program.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Don, you also raise money at scale through the securitization market as well. But do you see rooms for other? Because in the last 10 years, we've seen probably more asset financiers exit than have entered. Would everyone agree? Paul?
Yeah, we saw the exit of GE Capital in sort of significant ways. CIT was another one, but just while I have the mic, from an owner perspective, I've seen the margins, and if these gentlemen have access to low cost of funding, I think they're definitely in the right business. I think Eddie and I are probably in the wrong business.
Wait a second.
May just switch.
Paul, how often do you have an owner who can't find financing?
Internationally, especially where you have an owner that has an older asset. I mean, we're talking about prehistoric aircraft, like 5 years old. It is extremely difficult for them, and I don't use the word extremely lightly. So at the moment, we could do with more financiers.
So there are a number of dynamics, but part of it, family offices, some of them don't want to have the same information disclosures, and it's easier if you go to an asset financer. Part of it. And the other thing is that the expertise necessary to fund into this particular market, it requires really experienced, really reliable professionals, internal resources, external. There aren't that many, right? And so if you collect the best ones, that's empowering, and that's what these companies have done, and others who have been successful.
Rich, as a former banker, do you think there should be more?
I think the levels are pretty good these days. Some folks got blown out in 2008, so I think it's right-sized.
And banks talk about doing it, and some do, but the volume of those transactions is very much diminished, and it has a lot to do with what happened during the recession. So many banks got burnt that they're disinclined to do it, other than if they have a great customer, right? Because bankers lend money to customers, and that's really the reason they do it.
Yeah, wealth management groups are still
or big corporate customers that they have a line of credit with. They have a number of products, and it's their way to keep that customer in the fold. So they have other assets, they have other leverage. So for them, it's easier, but they don't want to own an aircraft, right? That's a difference.
Yeah, I'll say that 2/3 of our business is pre-owned aircraft, and we don't put the deals into a straitjacket. If it's more than 5 years old, we love it. We look at it on an aircraft by aircraft basis, on a client by client basis. And I met with a client yesterday. We're talking about financing a 2005 G550, and you know what? That works. From our perspective, from their perspective, it's the right aircraft. They want to put it through a rigorous pre-buy. They're going to have it on all the programs. We know what the maintenance profile of that plane looks like over the next 10 years that they want to have the loan with us. And, we look at every situation down to its specifics. And because we're in this business every day, it's all we do. We don't have that fear factor that sometimes the banks do around, things they don't fully understand, and they haven't invested the resources in trying to understand it.
Well, especially jurisdictions, right? You'll do jurisdictions that banks wouldn't do, or be very reluctant to do unless they have an office there.
Although you're non-bank lenders, but you raise money from the bank market and from the bond market with rating agencies, so you're not faster than a bank, are you?
Well, we are faster for sure. From a decision-making perspective, we've got an investment committee that meets every week at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, and no trade secrets here. We get to decisions quickly, and so what we're able to put on the table for customers is the certainty, right? So a lot of the times our customers will say, I don't even want to sign an LOI until you guys tell me that I'm good to go, and we can give them that certainty of execution. And then as you wind through the process, especially for a pre-owned aircraft, the pre-buys can tend to be long-winded. We're there for you every step of the way. And we understand, when a complication comes up, what the implications are, and we can adjust timelines accordingly.
Don, are you faster?
Are we faster?
Than a bank?
Oh, yeah, we can be, for sure. We're, for the right deal, we can be, inside of a week. Typically it's longer than that, but, our team is very small by design. So by the time we propose, for all intents, it's approved.
I mean, I can actually attest to what Don just said, to them being able to pull off deals within inside of a week or two. But just to step back from a second, a bit of real talk, yourselves notwithstanding, I think between the two of you, there's 150 aircraft. am I 100 on their side? You're
We're 180 aircraft.
okay. So apologies, 250 aircraft. That's still a very small percentage of the global fleet, particularly in the used market. The world is a large place, and there's many owners that would love to access efficient capital at the moment, but for whatever reason are unable to.
Okay, here's a sustainability question. I think next year the conference will be vegan. As asset financiers and legal advisors, are you starting to consider offset carbon emissions programs in conjunction with investors and end users to do your bit?
I'd say it's early stages, but yes, we're definitely, looking at the landscape, figuring out what our role in that landscape is. And certainly, I think there is an opportunity here to, help people fund offset programs if that's the route they want to go. So it's early days for us, but it's something front and center, frankly. I mean, it is front and center for the entire industry.
Do you worry about third-party investors? Do you worry it's going to get harder to get debt in bond investors if they've got CSR targets, corporate social responsibilities?
I think I don't quite see that yet. I see these guys often. We press the flesh very regularly to give folks updates on our business, and I haven't had that come up in any kind of serious context. But the landscape is shifting rapidly. We're going to be in touch with those guys. My guess is that as a financier, people see us kind of as one level removed. If anything, they worry about the broader asset class, and that's why I think it's really important for us as an industry to be out there, allaying people's concerns around, what the usage is, what the carbon footprint of our industry is.
I mean, I think that most large banks are very reputation sensitive, and so I do think that they're thinking quite a bit about it and how they could play some kind of positive role, but it's going to be an increasing reality for all of us, and it's something to keep in mind, especially if you're investing in the assets like you guys are.
And I applaud what Ali Reza was doing. They didn't need to do that. That's great.
I certainly think from an investor standpoint, ESG guidelines are becoming increasingly the norm. So if we look at what's happening in other industries and across other financing sectors, I think it's fairly safe to say that ESG thresholds will be a feature of business aircraft financing going forward. And I mean, by the way, congratulations to everyone in the room. We're in the industry right now at a moment which represents a sort of single greatest kind of looming crisis. Our industry is far more exposed to public scrutiny than the commercial aviation industry, and I actually just spoke on sustainability at a commercial conference last week or 2 weeks ago. This industry, even today, I saw a headline where, are they a sponsor? NetJets came under scrutiny for having, I think, Eddie Vedder, not Eddie from Vedder, a rock star. Are you a rock star? He flew to one of their events to perform, and they advertised it, and it completely blew up in their face. You have to look at things like that and just be mindful of how we approach these requirements going forward.
Okay, quick question. Does reluctance or lack of transparency from ultra-high net worth individuals regarding know your customer information cause increasing problems for your business / slow things down significantly?
As far as KYC, AML, background checks, absolutely. A lot of our clients are high net worth individuals in emerging markets, and the whole process of information gathering is very progressive. It takes time. But if it's financial information and there's privacy concerns, we could understand, but KYC, AML, that would be a red flag, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that, as a aircraft financier, business aircraft financier, the KYC issues you face are unique. So the way we're set up, we do run a very rigorous compliance program. But, the individuals that run that program are very conversant with the sorts of things to look for. So they tend to be faster than what your experience would be going to a bank, where it's going to end up in a much bigger compliance silo, where there'll be a lot of checklists, a lot of boxes to tick, and whereas we focus really on the substance. So it's not like we're any less rigorous. We just get you through the process a whole lot faster and more efficient.
And that actually is one of the reasons why private wealth customers rely on their private wealth banks, right? If it's a similar banking relationship, because it's already there, they don't have to go through the same steps.
Okay, final question, quick fire answers. You can just say a word or a region. Which markets are the most promising for 2020?
U.S.
So I'll make a plug for our new Europe office. Alex Ash over here, we're very excited about the opportunities here as we really make our presence felt and the brand grows stronger in this European market. The U.S. Will continue to be a source of strength for us. Greater China, obviously going through its own issues at this point, but back half of the year, we expect that'll come back. So really, those are the three big focus markets for us.
I would say pre-owned, long-range, large cabin airplanes.
Paul?
One of the few good things about being a lawyer is we frankly get them going up or coming down, sometimes literally.
So do you think repossessions is going to be?
Yeah, so all of it. But I agree that the U.S. is the deepest and most liquid market in the sectors, but there's certainly a lot still happening in Asia, which we'll talk about this afternoon, and elsewhere as well.
USA.
And he gets in. And on that populist slogan, thank you very much to everyone.